Welcome back to the channel. We're going to continue working on our 2021 Acura RDX A-Spec. We did get some brand new parts, so let's see what we got and how far we can get on this thing. Now when I price out my builds to make sure they're going to be profitable to rebuild, I always figure used parts because I know they're available. Sometimes new parts are on back order, you can't get them. So I price everything out used and I always take like the highest price. Figure that in and then I know I can probably find it cheaper later on if I win the vehicle. It's exactly what happened. Unfortunately, all those used parts were way more expensive than the brand new parts. Don't ask me why junkyards are charging so much for parts. The hood, for example, $850 for a used one, and none of them were even near me. This one was delivered to me for 500 bucks. Brand new OEM. I could have gotten an aftermarket one for 50 bucks cheaper, but why not go with the brand new OEM one? I do have a supervisor here today, but luckily she has an irrational fear of boxes, so I should be able to build myself a fort and hide in it later on in the day, so I don't have to work all day. But anyway, back to our car. Everything here is brand new OEM with the exception of one part that was aftermarket, only because it was one, cheaper, and two, not available from Acura. Now, if a junkyard was selling that part for twice what Acura wanted, I could understand it, but they didn't even sell that. It was just a bumper reinforcement, the upper piece. So you can't find those separately. Aftermarket had one for $23 and available the next day. So that's in this pile somewhere. Now we're still missing the parts I'd really like to put on, which is the air intake. We have the air box, but the intake tube, which would be much easier to put on when the whole front end is apart, we don't have that yet. So hopefully that comes in through the magic of video editing before this video is over, and we can throw everything back on this truck, car, SUV, whatever you want to call it. So let's get as much stuff as we can together right now, and the painting gnome is going to edge out our parts, and we'll throw all those on in a few minutes. Since I sprung for all the OEM parts, we got to save money where we can, so we're going to save all the blue Kool-Aid. Radiator's full to about 3/4 of the way up, about this high. So we'll save what we can, and then we don't have to buy it. So while that's draining, let's go do something else. So Honda lets you buy their cooling fans in pieces. There's 3 pieces. There's a fan, a motor, and a shroud. And it's actually cheaper to buy all 3 of these pieces and put it together than it is to buy a completely assembled used one or even a completely assembled aftermarket one. So actually we didn't even need a fan blade and a motor for the driver's side cooling fan. So let's assemble our cooling fans and get them on our brand new OEM radiator that's in another box. So we'll pull our old cooling fans off of our radiator. There's just bolts across the top, and there's tabs on the bottom that slide into the slots that are on the bottom of the radiator. This one's just broken right here, so we'll start with this one. Probably reverse threads. Maybe not. Nope. That could have been bad. That's why I didn't just send it right from the beginning. Give it a couple bumps and see if it breaks loose. If it doesn't, then you can go ahead and switch directions. Now we got our blade off of here. We'll disconnect our motor. There's a clip on the bottom of the plug and a couple of tabs that it slides into. And then we'll pull the screws out of the back of it. And we have our new shroud. We can figure out how it goes. Got our supervisor inspecting my work. Am I doing it right? Actually, no. I could have got away with leaving the fan on the motor and just unbolting the motor. Of course, the supervisor wrote me up for not using a torque wrench on everything. Oh well. Fire me. And we got a random spacer. Our wire back into our shroud and clip the plug back in. think the spacer looks like it goes right there. That's where it's going now. Set our fan on there. And tighten it down. Make sure it spins. Our brand new OEM radiator even came with a sensor and a cap. Whew. And it was cheap. The OEM radiator was cheaper than aftermarket and used, so that's why I went with it. Can't go wrong when you're using OEM stuff. Bolt our cooling fan in. Click. Still spins. One down. Uh-oh, this one's 4 pieces. This one's got a heat shield on it, and I didn't get that, so looks like we're going to have to do some body work. We'll unbolt our heat shield. I'm pretty sure this is what took out our wastegate and wastegate plug. A little dent in it. We'll do a little body work. Try to get it flat and put the little crease back in it where it belongs. That's about all we can do on the floor. We'll have to take it over to the vise and do the rest. Even though we got on the pieces, we need all the screws. Still have to take it apart. This fan comes apart the same way as our other one, even though it's not the same fan. This one had the heat shield on it because it backs up against the turbo. So we unbolted our fan and left the blade on it this time. Sometimes the motors go in from the back, so you have to take the blade off first. This one doesn't matter. You can take the motor off first, leave the blade on it, like I should have done with the other one. I did get a new motor for this one. Wasn't sure if it was bent, but it was wobbling, so better to be safe than sorry. And they were actually not that expensive. Got all our holes lined up, with all our screws in. And we can run our wire down the back of our shroud. And clip the plug into the shroud. I'll put our spacer on there. Turns out that was where that spacer belonged, on the other one. We'll put our new blade on. Got to take off the stickers first. And tighten it down. And back to our PDR on our heat shield. Hopefully we can get it pretty straight without Bondo. That looks good. Like a glove. Of course, I don't know what gloves fit like, so I guess that's not saying much. Now we can drop this cooling fan on our radiator. Slide the tabs in the bottom and bolt it in. The supervisor's always watching. Now we can pull off our lower radiator hose. Yay, spring clamps. Slide the clamp back, untwist the hose off, and hope that we've drained all the antifreeze out or we're going to have a mess. No, no mess. Slide the hose on our new radiator and slide the clamp down. We'll adjust the clamp to make sure that we have optimal timing for best leak-free performance. We can unbolt our condenser from our radiator. So unbolt the 4 bolts and drop this bottom one down into the cage. With a cage match, only the strongest bolts survive. Pull our bolts out of the fittings. Put them back in there so we remember where they went. And now we can start our bolts for our condenser and our radiator. The bottom of the condenser is slotted, so we can put the bolts in first and then just drop the condenser down on them. Then we can put our bolts in the top and tighten them all down. Then we'll put our bolts back in our fittings. We'll leave the little plastic caps on them for now, just to keep any debris out of there. Actually, the rubber caps, so you can bend them a little bit. Because we don't have the rest of our parts yet. So we're just going to have to leave this sit. And Honda gave us this nice box, so we're going to use it. We'll just pull the little box off the inside that they used to keep it from moving around during shipping, since now we have cooling fans and a condenser in there. And set that off to the side, and hopefully in a few minutes our parts will be here. Supervisor's inspecting my packaging. Did manage to find some used headlights. They were literally half the price of new ones. So, got two for the price of one. And did go searching through the pile of wreckage and found the original bolts, so put this bracket on. We'll hold the broken piece of plastic with a pair of pliers and unbolt it, resisting the urge to try to hold that piece of sharp plastic with our hands and hit it with the impact and spin it around and rip all of our skin off. That's a lesson I had to learn a few times. I know what you're thinking. Gloves would help, but you know what also helps? Learning the lesson the first time. Now we're going to pull our air box out of here, what's left of it. Pull the wiring harness out of the back. There's a bolt back there. Now we can get to it. And we'll just throw all the bolts in our little battery box here, along with our tools. We'll flip over the air box. We need to get the wiring harness off of it. Squeeze the tabs on the back. Not sure why they chose to clip that into the air box, but they did. Now we can take off our broken inlet tube, unbolt it, and pull the boot off. We have a vacuum line on the back with a little baby spring clamp, so we'll slide that spring clamp back. Spring clamps are so cute when they're young before they grow up into the evil ones that snap on your fingers. Pull out the overflow. Now we can unbolt our wiring harness. It's in a plastic casing that bolts to our intake tube. Pull the bolts out of that, pull it back a little bit, and now we can get to our bolts to unbolt our intake tube. There's just two that go into the back of the turbo. And there's why our car wouldn't run. Now we have to disconnect our oxygen sensor. And we have to pull it out of here. We need to get the heat shield off. And in order to get the heat shield off, we have to take the oxygen sensor out. Look at that. We can spin it out by hand. It's nice working on new cars. Unbolt our heat shield. Looks like that's going to need a little body work. So we'll hammer away. Try to get the louvers back in there. One more hammer and dollying. Good as new. And now we can change our wastegate. The only way to get this wastegate from Acura is to buy the entire turbo, and it's pretty pricey. However, Honda does use the same wastegate on a lot of other vehicles, like the CR-V, the Accord, and the Civic. Pretty much anything with the 1.5. And for some of those, it is available separately. So I bought one separately. Now I'm just going to swap it out. It was a lot cheaper. I'd actually thought about buying a used turbo with the wastegate and then just taking the wastegate off and tossing the turbo, but I didn't have to. This was actually cheaper to get a brand new one. So that's what I did. So we pulled the little pin to disconnect the end of the wastegate from the turbo, and then we pulled all the screws out of it. And now we have our new one. We're going to slide it in here. Hook it back on our turbo and start putting in these tiny little screws. They're just begging to be lost somewhere in Narnia. We'll start with the easy to get to one. Hopefully we won't lose that. And once that's in, we can start all the others. And finally the last one, the one we're most likely to drop. Put our little cotter pin back on the turbo and put our heat shield back on.
There is some adjustment on that wastegate, but we can get to it when this is all back together. So we'll put it all back together and start it up, put the scanner on it, and see how close it was from the factory. Now we can put our oxygen sensor back in here. Look at that. You can thread it almost all the way in by hand. Put our socket on here, just snug it up, click. We'll run our wire back over and clip it in. Plug it in and put it back through its little wire holders. And while we were getting everything else together, the parts delivery driver dropped off our little air intake tube, so we can put that in here. We'll slide it into the boot, and then we're going to move it around, get the other end of it lined up, and start our bolts down there. We'll tighten those down. Click. Gotta torque the other one down. Click. Put our vacuum line back on. Our baby spring clamp. And now we can route our wiring harness. Put the bolts back in that. And clip the wiring harness into the intake. And there's more vacuum line on the bottom as well. And we can put our bolts in the other end. Tighten those down. Get a little ahead of ourselves. Start with that last one, then tighten them all down. Now we need to change our plug for our wastegate. So we'll pop the safety off. We'll release the pins and pull them out of here. I got a pigtail, came with the wires, but rather than splicing the wires, I'm just going to de-pin everything because all it's broken is our connector. That way we don't have any spliced wires. It'll be a nice solid connection like it was from the factory. We're going to try to get all the pins back in the same place. So I probably won't remember how they go. I did take a picture of them for reference, just so I know which colors go where. And that's also another reason I didn't want to use my pigtail, because it was all the same color wire. So in addition to having splices I really don't need, you got all the same color wire. We got our one last pin, push that in there. Make sure we're all engaged, locked in there. A little tug. And they're staying. Now we can put our little lock in there, hold them all in place, and plug it in. Done. Good as new. We got our radiator support all painted, so now we're ready to start putting that in. We painted the whole thing even though Honda didn't. That way, when somebody's working on it, they can say somebody's been here before. So the first thing we're going to do is transfer over the wiring harness. Just released all the clips from the inside so that we'd save them all, and then they clip right into our new radiator support. Now we're going to set it up here. You can put the radiator and condenser in ahead of time, but I'm not going to, just because it's easier to get it on afterwards. Instead of trying to struggle to connect everything behind the radiator. Put our couple bolts in here so it doesn't fall off. These are just the ones that hold the radiator support only. We'll tighten them down. Try to get back where it was originally. Put our horn back on. And put the horn on the other side. Bolt in our wiring harness and then plug it in. We can bolt our airbag sensors back in and plug those in. And now we can put our intercooler in. And this was the main reason that I didn't want to put the radiator support in fully assembled. Getting this charge pipe on is pretty easy, But this one back here on the engine, it's a little hard to get to when there's a radiator, condenser, and cooling fans in your way. So we'll put this in ahead of time. That way I can get to that clamp and bolt it in, and then drop the radiator in later, which really isn't that hard. Putting this whole thing together is super easy either way. So we'll tighten up all of our clamps. Make sure you get the timing right. There we go. We'll pull all of our caps out of our radiator hoses. And we're going to drop our cooling assembly in here. Reconnect our wires to our cooling fan down at the bottom. And slide our radiator hose on. Bolt our radiator to our radiator support. And we'll release the evil spring clamp that was locked. And adjust the timing. Now we can slide our lower radiator hose onto the engine. Plug in our cooling fan, one on the right side, and then move our spring clamp up. I'm going to try and squeeze it just enough that it doesn't catch in the locks. Now we can reconnect our condenser. We'll pull the caps off the lines that we had and the ones that we had in the condenser when it was shipped. Put our bolts back in, and we'll save all those little caps for future use. Bolt our lines in, plug in the pressure sensor, and drop our overflow bottle in here, complete with blue Kool-Aid. Pull the hose off of here, route it back up to the radiator, flip it into the radiator support, and slide it onto the end of the radiator. And put the bracket on for the air box. Still has the bolt and part of the old air box attached to it. We'll take that part out. Save the bolt. Toss the air box piece. We have our new air box. Slide it in there. And put that bolt back in. The one in the back and the one on the other side. Now we can snap our wiring harness in. Put our air filter back in. And put the lid back on. That's a brand new lid. Our other one was cracked. And the screws are not included with our brand new lid, so we're going to have to transfer them out of our old lid. They're all exactly the same, and you can buy them individually. And because I'm such a hack, I'm going to put them in the wrong spot. And I got tired of using a screwdriver as well. Alright, that's 2 screws in the wrong spot. Guess we're going to make it back in the right spot. Okay, we got 1 in the right spot. And that's exactly why rebuilt cars are never the same. 25% ain't bad. We can pull our mass airflow sensor out of here. Slide it down in there and tighten it down. We'll pull the boot off the end. And we'll sneak it in between our intake tube and the top of our air box. And tighten down the clamps. Plug in our mass airflow sensor and clip the harness into the top of the airbox. We can drop our battery in. It's thawed out and fully charged. Put our lid back on. And reattach our positive cable. Booga booga, internet. With an impact, just to drive the internet experts nuts. Do the same thing on the negative cable. And we can put our battery hold down in. in the J-bolts and tighten them down. That's not going anywhere. Now we need to change the hood hinge on the passenger side. So we unbolt it. Now we gotta take our hood shock off, stick a pick in the back of it, and release the little clip. Twist it out of there. And now we're gonna take the little knob out that the support clips onto. You can see the paint was cracked. It's starting to rust. That's from when it was bent. Rather than trying to straighten it, just bought a new one. Even though it was kind of pricey. I want to say they were like 50 bucks. Put our little knob back on here. Tighten it down to manufacturer specs. And set our hood hinge down here. Bolt it down. And clip in our hood support. Now ready to put our hood up here. To do it by myself since I have no friends. And the supervisor is chasing squirrels. Luckily it's aluminum. We get one bolt started. On the side that the fender's still on, that's the side I'm really worried about messing up the paint. Of course, I'm also worried about the windshield. That's why we put a little rag back there, so if it does slide into the windshield, hopefully it doesn't break it. We got one bolt in the driver's side. We can start our bolts on the passenger side. We didn't need to change the hinge on the driver's side. It wasn't bent. At least I hope it wasn't bent. We're about to find out. All right, we're out of the woods. We got bolts in both sides, and our windshield's still in one piece. We tighten them all up. There's not a whole lot of adjustment on there, so hopefully it's in the right spot. Now we can put our reinforcement back up here. Slide it underneath the horns, and hang it on the little hooks. There we go. Now we can start a few bolts. We want to get them all in there before we tighten it down. We'll snug them up. And we have to unbolt our horn so we can get to these two back here. I only put the horn in there so I'd remember where the bolt and where the horn went. Now we got all our bolts in. We can send them home. Put the horn back on there. And tighten up the other side. That's not going anywhere. Now we can drop our center support down there between the intercooler and the condenser. Start our bolt in the bottom. And we'll put our upper bumper support in. Flip it into the hooks on the radiator support. That's our only aftermarket piece. Tighten it all up. And we can actually use an impact on the bottom because it's not all wrapped up there. At least not until it hits a deer. Flip our wiring harness into our upper bumper support. We can put our bracket in for our radar unit. Bolt that in. And take the wiring harness off the remaining parts of our old bracket and clip it into our new one. Flip our radar unit in there and snap it in. This does have to be recalibrated, and we are going to have to put a new plug on it, but it's not here yet. Maybe it'll be here later in the episode. Clip in our little plastic baffles. And clip in our little plastic retainers for our closeout panel, and screw in our rubber baby buggy bumpers. We're going to throw our fender on here. Brand new fender. It was actually reasonably priced. This one came pre-dented. You can see the bodywork gnome's already started some of his bodywork. He'll finish it up later once it's on the car. That way he doesn't have to try to chase around the stand. It'll be a little more secure. We'll bolt our fender in. Try to get back in the old marks. It should line up. Put our bolt in the top of the fender. And get our socket back. Gaps look good. Hold the fender where we want it as we run the bolt in. And put the bolt up in the front. That bracket was a little bent. I'll tighten up the top. And we'll close our hood and see how everything looks. Our hood gap to our fender is nice. And so is our door to our fender. There's a little filler that goes in there, so it'll close that up. Our fender fits our hood on the other side. Looks pretty good. Now we're going to put our hood latch together. We'll clip our safety cable into the safety latch. Actually, this is the release handle. Then we can clip the hood cable from inside the car to our hood latch. Snap that in. Then we can connect the cable that comes from our handle for the safety release. One cable wasn't enough on these, I guess. Put the cable into our upper supports, and we'll put the bolts back in for our hood latch. I always fit the hood without the hood latch in because there is some adjustment on the hood latch, and if you don't have it perfectly centered, it can throw your gaps off. So you're trying to move the hood around and it ends up being the latch. So you get your hood in the right spot, put the latch in. If it's pulling your hood to one side or the other, just move it around according to where you need it to go. So we got it where we want it. We'll tighten it down and put that other bolt in the bottom. We just snugged up to 2 actually, so that we could test fit it. And then we put the other one in and tighten them all down for good. Put our cap back on. Now we're going to relieve a little strap. Admit it, you wanted to do that. Now that we have our RDX all back together, we can start taking some of it apart again. We need to strip all of our parts down that we're going to blend, like our door and our fender. So we're going to pull our door panel off of here. A couple screws behind the door handle and one under the grab handle. And then just pull the door panel off. We'll reach in back and unplug the wiring harness. And then disconnect our lock and our handle cables. And you can pull the top trim panel from around the window off. And unplug it. There's a light in there for the blind spot monitor. You can unplug our mirror and then unbolt it. Wiggle it out of there. Fish the wiring harness and put the gasket back on it. Look at that, Mr. Spotty showed up and the build isn't even over. Now we're going to stab ourselves in the finger. Pull the plug out so we can access the bolt that holds the cap on for the back of the door handle. Loosen that up. Apparently Superman put that on. Pull the cap off. We'll unplug our door lock actuator. Pull our water barrier down a little bit. We can release the wiring harness clip and pull the water barrier down a little further. At least Honda got away from the gooey fun stuff and moved on to the GM style reusable sticky stuff that doesn't get everywhere. I appreciate that. So we unplugged our door handle. That's what we had to get in there for. And we can pull it out and slide it back and fish our wire out of there. And the gasket's coming with. Pull the rear gasket off. And we can pull our belt molding off. Get a pick in there and release the clips on the back side. Keep a little tension on it. And just a little wiggle and pull. And hopefully we don't break them. The back one you can't get to, so we're just going to use the wiggle and pull method. And we saved it. We need to take our moldings off the bottom. They're two-sided taped on, and then they have some clips on the back. We're just going to slide our spatula across the top of it. Break that two-sided tape loose. There's only tape across the top and down the front and back edges. We're also going to try not to gouge up the paint. Hope the painter's not watching me do this. So now all the clips face in one direction. So rather than trying to release them all, we're just going to tap the molding back, slide it off the clips and leave those in the door. And then we just twist the clips and they fall right out of the door. The holes in the door are rectangles. The back of the clips have little squares that just attach on the top and the bottom. Now we can slide those back in our molding and it's ready to go back on as soon as we put the two-sided tape back on it. Now we're going to do our upper molding. Same way. It has two-sided tape on both the top and the bottom. And the back edge. Now our two-sided tape is off. And we're going to release the clips in there and twist out the back ones that we weren't able to get to. We're going to pull our nameplate off of our driver's side fender. Really hope the painter isn't watching this. If we're careful, we won't destroy our paint. And if we do, job security for the painter. We'll retape that. And we'll clean off the rest of our two-sided tape with our magic eraser. Those are available in my Amazon store if you need to take off some two-sided tape. Makes that job so much easier. The bumper bracket on the end of the fender is going to be on our way, so we need to take that off. Got some plastic little clips in it with Phillips heads. So you just twist them a little bit, pop the centers out, and we'll wiggle and pull, and that's out. We can pop off our extension for our cowl screen. Pull a little push pin out of it, then unsnap it from the fender. And then slide it out from under the edge of the fender and the windshield. And get all the tree parts out of there. Now we have to finish taking the rest of our wheel liner off of here. We'll pull all the push pins out of that. Toss that in the back of the car. Now we'll pull the tire off of this side because we have a whole lot more to get off, get this wheel liner off. Since we can't get the fender off to get to the clips on the back of it, we're going to have to pull it forward and reach in. We pulled most of the push pins out of it. Pull a little molding off the back of it. We get our wiggle and pull settings right. And it looks like we have all the easy to get out clips. So we'll get to the ones that we got to push on the back. That was awful close to the sewer. That one was in the sewer. And since I was the second one to go in the sewer, we're not going for 3 strikes. I don't want to drop another one now. I haven't lost that many clips in 10 years. Told you I wouldn't drop another one. And now we're going fishing. And we haven't been fishing since the afternoon crew was working on our Scion TC. Although for that one we got to use a magnet. This one we're using the claw because those little clips are made out of anti-magnetic plastic. We got 1, and we got 2. So our plug is broken here, and it's only this little piece on the outside. I bought a whole plug, but rather than splicing in the wires, I'm just gonna pull out these pins. It has to slide in from the back, so we have to take all the wires out, put this over it, and slide it back together. If you've ever made fuel lines or brake lines and forgot to put the fitting on the line before you flared it, that's kind of like that. Hopefully we get this piece on there before we put the end of the plug back on and forget it. And if you've ever made fuel lines or brake lines and didn't forget to put the fitting on first, you either haven't done enough or you're lying. Just release all of our pins. The pick was working better than the actual tool. And we're going to make sure that our back piece is on in the right direction. It would really suck to have to do this twice because we put it on backwards. Then we can put all of our pins back in the front of the plug. Clip our safeties on. There's 1 on each side. And snap the plug back together. And clip it into our radar unit. So we got all the parts back in our RDX. It runs, it drives, everything's good. All of our dash emojis are off, except for all the parking sensors on the front, which is obvious because, well, we're missing a front bumper. So when we get all that back on, hopefully all those lights will be gone. So we're waiting on the painting room to come do his job. Once he does, I'll be back to throw all those parts on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you when it's blue.